Let's go to back to the year 445 BC. And Nehemiah, who was Artaxerxes, the Persian king's cupbearer, gets terrible news about what's going on back at his home city of Jerusalem and in the province of Judah, and asks Artaxerxes for permission to leave and to return to his hometown in Jerusalem and to see about getting whatever's wrong fixed. And he gets back there and he finds the place is just in a mess. The walls are torn down, the people are discouraged, and you've got to realize they were surrounded by people who were not friendly to their presence at the time. And in chapter 4, after they get started building the wall, chapter 4 is nothing but a listing or a retelling of the opposition that Nehemiah and his followers faced in trying to get the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt so that the people who settle there can have some sense of security to go on with their lives. In fact, verses 15 through 23 of Nehemiah 4 tells us about Nehemiah's steps to prevent any enemy attacks. In fact, Nehemiah was excellent when he faced trouble of taking the proper steps to head off trouble. And of course, Nehemiah depended upon God for every movement, just about every decision that he made, which tells us why he was so successful at getting those walls rebuilt in spite of the problems that he and his few stragglers met in Jerusalem. And we'll go into Nehemiah 5 now. We've looked at chapter 4 where we talked strictly about opposition from outsiders, from foreigners, non-Jewish people, Gentiles, and the threats and the intimidation that they went through to try to stop the wall to prevent them from having any competition there. And chapter 5 deals with not outside problems, but problems from within. And up to this point, Nehemiah's challenges as a spiritual leader, and that's what he wanted to be after he got that wall built. We focused mainly on those problems outside of Judah, but when the walls were finally rebuilt, he met the most difficult kind of problem that you can have, and those problems which arise from within. And in verse 1, we have problems arising from, and I guess the best way to sum it up is a word called greed. There were three groups of people who were being oppressed during a time of famine, Nehemiah learns. And in verse 2, the first group is the poor who did not even have enough food to survive. Verse 3 was property owners who had to mortgage their fields and their homes to buy food for their families. And verse 4 tells us about others who had to borrow money to pay their taxes. The complaint was that during the famine, the wealthy Jews were loaning money and charging, my translation has usury, which originally simply meant interest, but it came to mean pretty soon excessive interest, even demanding the debtors' properties, and their working age children as collateral on any loans that they might give them. And the result was, in verse 5, that the people's properties were being lost to the family, and their children were turning into being enslaved because they were collateral for the debt that they had not been able to pay. Now, in times of these economic distress, families would borrow funds using members of their own family and sometimes even their own selves as collateral or backup for the loan. And if a man could not repay the loan and the interest on the loan, his daughters, his sons, his wife, or even himself could be sold into bondage. And a Hebrew who fell into debt would serve his creditor as a hired servant for at least how long? Until the next what? Until the next Jubilee, which happened every 7 years. In fact, Leviticus 25, 39, and 40, and I don't like to read all of these details, but some of these are important. It says, if a countryman of yours becomes so poor with regard that he sells, with regard to you that he sells himself to you, you shall not subject him to a slave service. He shall be unto you as a hired man, not a slave. As if he were a sojourner or foreigner, he shall serve with you until the year of Jubilee, and then he was allowed to go back home and resume his normal life. Now, Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 through 18 tells us about that. But what happens to the man who decides that he does not want to leave his master?
He could sell himself.
He would tell the master, and this is applicable to what we were talking about after the last Wednesday night's song. He would go to the master and say, I don't want to leave. I love you, and you treat me right. I want to stay right here and spend the rest of my life serving you. And so the master would take an awl, an AWL, which is a sharp wood tool, drive it through the servant's ear into a door. And that was the legal means by which he became a servant to his master forever. And there was a song we sang called Pierce My Ear. And that's what reminded me of that. Anyway, when Nehemiah, verses 6 through 13, found out what was going on, he was extremely upset and put the creditors, the people who were owed the money, in their place. Verse 7 says he thought about this himself before he decided what to do or what to speak. Now, maybe I speak and then think about what I just said. Now, I may be the only person like that, but that's what I do too many times. Did you? Well, I am one of them. I am one of them. I speak and then I think and sometimes regret what I just said. Now, Nehemiah didn't. Read verse 6. That's the way it's supposed to be done, folks. Nehemiah called a public meeting to confront those who were guilty. In verse 8, he pointed out that their behavior was inconsistent and contradictory to what God had said. And he pointed out that he and the others in exile had done what he had done to help people who were in trouble like that financially. In fact, he says he and others had already bought some indentured servants back from their creditors. And what were they doing? They were turning around and selling them. And Nehemiah and his friends were having to buy them back. Their Jewish brothers, no less. I like the Holman Christian Standard version of verse 8, Nehemiah 5:8. We have done our best to buy back our Jewish countrymen who were sold to foreigners, but now you sell your own countrymen, and we have to buy them back. And that's what he confronted them with. He warned them in verse 9 and challenged them to be witnesses for God, because that kind of practice was making them a laughing stock. He gave his personal testimony in verse 10 that he and his family and his officials were lending money to those who needed it, but without what? No interest. No interest. The lending of money, by the way, at interest is not forbidden in the Bible. It's just forbidden between two Jewish brothers. The Bible says you can charge interest to a foreigner, Deuteronomy 23, but you can't charge interest to your Jewish brother. Exodus 22:25 says, if you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. And these Jewish people, leaders, were doing just that. And then when they couldn't pay, they took their farms, and they took the people who couldn't pay as servants, and so they were getting rich off of the poor. So, Nehemiah appeals to these wealthy Jews to restore immediately the property that they had held in pledge, verse 5, and also to stop charging their Jewish brothers, debtors, any interest at all. And I think what it says there is 100th part of the money, and the experts tell us that that is about 1% a month or 12% per year to return that money. And thus their brethren would be able to start paying off not the interest, but what? The principal, and the debt would actually be coming down every time they, quote, sent a check, unquote. Okay, verse 12, the wealthy felt probably very, very ashamed because this was a public meeting, and they were exposed as being greedy and taking advantage of their Jewish brothers. And they promised to return every piece of property and every cent of interest that they had charged their Jewish brothers. And Nehemiah quickly summoned the priests and placed them and the wealthy under oath never to do that ever again. And then he warned them in verse 13 by taking the folds of his robes and saying, anybody who charges his brother interest or takes his brother as slave because of charging him interest. Well, in fact, let's just read verse 13. 5:13. And I shook my robe out the front of my garment and said, thus may God shake out every man from his house and from his possessions who does not fulfill this promise. Even thus they may be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, amen. And they praised the Lord. Then the people did according to this promise. That is, I'm going to shake you out of my robe, and if you continue to do that, God's going to do the same thing to you. Now, that's where they carried their valuables, I suppose, was in the folds of their robes when they were traveling. And he says, it symbolically acted that out by shaking out the folds of his robe and said, thus shall God do to you if you continue to do this. Verses 14 through the end tells us about Nehemiah's example. Verse 14 says, moreover, from the day that I was appointed to be their governor. Now, you remember last Wednesday night I told you we think that when Nehemiah left Artaxerxes with the commission and the permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls, that I think I told you that I think that was at the time, and the piece of paper, the authorization that appointed Nehemiah as governor, and this is the reason why, is in chapter 5, verse 14. From the day that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, which is 444 to 432 BC. That was Nehemiah's first term as governor. So he's saying here that I have served 12 years as governor. And if you back up, that's when he left, it was 12 years ago. So that's where we get that. Verse 14 and 15, he says, I have an expense account from the government, but I didn't even use it for my personal use, and I didn't collect any taxes from the officials, from the people, and he and his officials paid their own expenses to keep from taking advantage of his brother. Now, what kind of shape do you think financially most of the people were in? It was a pretty pitiful situation. It was probably, that a lot of the people were probably desperately poor and trying to go back and scratch out a living surrounded by enemies to boot who were trying to discourage them.
The Jews did that before World War II. That's why the Germans were so down upon them because they had gone out and took their currency and bought the houses and lived in the good house, and the Germans were living kind of in the suburbs, and they were hostile towards them.
They were jealous. Yeah. Verse 15, he says, my conduct is in direct contrast to the governors who have preceded me, whose names we don't have, but it wouldn't include, of course, I don't think included Ezra. Verse 16, Nehemiah devotes himself to building the wall and serving his people. He says, we did not buy any land. So as Governor Nehemiah could have loaned people money to pay their taxes, then you have them use their land as collateral for the loan, and then when they couldn't pay back what they had borrowed, he could offer them a low price for their land and enrich himself. But he says, I never took advantage of my brothers like that. In verses 17 and 18, he says, I even shared my money with others. He provided food and wine for 150 people, officials and employees, as well as the returning exiles. Not only did I not take money from these people, but I helped them proactively all that I was able to. Yes, 150, yes. 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 It was a lot of, quite an expense to feed 150 people a day.
Evidently, the cupbearer
Made good money. He must have made good money because, as I said, he was one of the most trusted officials in King Artaxerxes' court and had constant access to the king. So it probably was a job that paid fairly well. Okay, verse 18, he says, I never even demanded the governor's food allowance because I showed compassion to my people. And he asked God in verse 19 not to forget that he's doing his best to do God's will. He's not parading a list of good deeds before God and saying that you owe me for what I have done. But he just wants God to remember that I have done the best I could to serve you the way I believe you want to be served in this difficult situation. Yes, John?
No, here in my Bible it said that when, just to give us an idea of the taxes that flowed in to the Persian, into Susa, from all of these
Provinces.
Nation, that when Alexander took over in Susa, he found about 340 tons of gold and 1,500 tons of silver stored in their storehouse.
Wow. And I understand it was all in ingots.
Yeah.
They melted down what you know, if you had to pay them with a bracelet or a ring or an earring, they would melt it down and store it like we do in Fort Knox in bars or ingots. Yeah. Now that would be, let's see, Alexander conquered the Persians in 331, so that was about 110 years in the future from where we are today. Thanks, John. That's a good point about how rich the Persian kings were at the time. Any questions on chapter 5 as Nehemiah deals with these greed problems?
Lloyd, I have a question.
Yeah, Tony.
Just back to something you said earlier about the Jubilee.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking that was 50 years.
Sabbath was every 7 years.
That's,
Land, Sabbath.
You're right. The Jubilee was 50 years. Thank you for correcting me.
I was,
749, Jubilee made 50.
I wasn't trying to correct, it was just that it
Well,
wasn't.
no, I needed correction.
They had to lay, the land had to be fair for it, you did it somewhere that said.
That was 7.
Yes, the land had to lay bare, fallow, I think they call it, for 7 years. That's right. Jubilee was you're right, it was every 50 years. Thank you.
I was one clarification.
But the
So
servants,
it certainly needed to be clarified.
the
because-
servants, Jubilee affected the land, but the servants were to be returned over to the Sabbath. I don't think they can only serve 7 years. I believe that.
I'll tell you what, let's go back. Let's go back to Deuteronomy 12. I think it's Deuteronomy 12. And see. Where are we? That's not right. That is
Try
not.
Leviticus 25.
I think I read Leviticus 25, but let's do it again. Let's not leave until we get me straight. Leviticus
I mean, that just makes reference to it.
12, Leviticus doesn't have, chapter 12 doesn't have 25 verses.
No, listen, Leviticus 25.
Oh,
Chapter
25, 12. We'll get there, folks. 25, 12. Okay, verse 10, let's back up to verse 10. For you shall thus consecrate the 50th year and proclaim a release through the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his own property, and each of you shall return to his family. Those are the indentured servants who have been serving because of debt.
The land that had been assigned to the families was returned to them on Jubilee.
Exactly, their homeland. You shall have the 50th years of Jubilee, verse 11. You shall not sow nor reap its aftergrowth, nor gather it from its untrimmed vines. For it is a Jubilee, it shall be holy to you. You shall eat its crops out of the field. In other words, God will provide for you that entire year, even though that you're not going to be out there in the fields working. Let's see, but there was another verse that I wanted to look at, and I can't put my finger on it. Okay, well, anyway, thank you, gentlemen. It's good to have people that are sharp, listening. Amen. All right.
What did you do every 7 years? They did something.
I think the land had the rest every 7th year. I think. Somebody needs to check me on that, too. That is correct. Sir, had the live fallow for 7 years to let the land rest. Yeah. I got that right. Okay. All right, chapter 6. We're going to look at Nehemiah's struggle at some threats that were made against him directly. The first scheme in the first few verses, I believe it's verse 4, is to lure Nehemiah away from Jerusalem. When the people heard that the wall was built, all except the gates had not been hung yet, they sent a message to Nehemiah wanting to meet him at a place called Ono, I believe about 20 miles from Jerusalem, and probably wanted to, if they got a chance, they were probably going to kill him if they could get him out there alone. And Nehemiah, in verse 3, replied that I am doing a great work, and I cannot come out to you. And they sent that message in the next verse 4 different times, and I suppose that Nehemiah gave them the same answer 4 times, that I'm not coming out there to talk to you. Verses 5 through 9, the second scheme was to try a little bit of slander and rumor and lies against him. And their scheme was, the 5th letter was a public or unsealed, or your translation may have an open letter to Nehemiah, so that all the people could read it. Sanballat charged in that letter that Nehemiah was plotting a rebellion to set himself up as king. And they alleged that this was the real reason Nehemiah had come back to build the wall. In verse 7, they alleged that certain prophets that he had paid were already proclaiming him as king. Now, this is from Sanballat and Tobiah, of course. You know these two scoundrels. And in light of what had happened a few years earlier, under this same king, Artaxerxes, back in Ezra 4, when they stopped the work, and he says, don't you do anything until you hear from me. I'm sure the people were very alarmed when they heard what Tobiah had written in that letter, fearful that the same thing was going to happen, that Artaxerxes was going to stop the wall construction again. Sanballat warned Nehemiah that this report would be taken to the king of Persia unless you come out here and meet with us. I think that's in verse 7. And of course, the letter kind of reads, letter kind of reads that, hey, we're on your side and we just want to meet with you to help you out of this. Now that's what's implied there, that we are on your side and that we're concerned, Nehemiah, about your welfare. So let's get out here and what my translation has, take counsel together and let's sit down and look at the matter impartially so that we can establish that you are innocent of any of these charges. In verse 8, that Nehemiah denied everything they said and accused them of lying. And again, he prayed to God for strength as he met this new challenge. A third effort against Nehemiah is in verses 10 through 14. They wanted to lead him into a trap inside Jerusalem, inside the temple itself. So they hired a Jewish man named Shemaiah to deceive Nehemiah and lead him into a trap by doing this. Shemaiah warned Nehemiah that there was an assassination plot against him that was going to happen that very night. And he suggested that they hide in the temple. And it is apparent also in verse 12 that Tobiah was on good terms with some of the priests in Jerusalem. Okay, we'll run into this again. He had some marital, that he was related to one of the priests. I think his daughter married one of the priest's sons. So he had some influence there and apparently had access to Shemaiah to hatch this plot. And verse 11, Nehemiah refuses to be a coward and run. He would not disobey God because only who was allowed to go into the temple proper? The priests. And what happens if you were not a priest? I went back and checked it. You died. You died. And that this Shemaiah proposed a course of action that was against God's law, labeled him as a what kind of a prophet? A false prophet. Anybody that would tell you to do something that is against what God has clearly said in the law, Nehemiah knew right off the bat what kind of person that he really was. And verse 12, Nehemiah knew that his enemies Tobiah and Sanballat had hired, or if you prefer the term, bribed Shemaiah to do that, to frighten Nehemiah into sinning and discredit himself as a coward, and thus effectually ruin his leadership abilities. In verse 14, Nehemiah prayed that God would carry out justice against Tobiah and Sanballat and all the people who were helping them. Now, in spite of this, thank the Lord, in verse 15, we find that in spite of everything that had gone on around and inside of Jerusalem at this time, the walls got finished in less than 2 months. They got finished in the fall of 445 or 444. 445 in October, probably, of 445 BC. The walls were finally done. It had been about a year since Nehemiah had gone to King Artaxerxes and asked the king for permission to go back to his home. 1 year later, the walls are finished. Verse 16 tells us that the enemies were just completely disheartened when they saw that in spite of their best efforts and threats, that the project got done just as Nehemiah had wanted it done, and God wanted it done. We learn of letters which had flowed constantly between Tobiah and some influential Jews inside of Jerusalem. And we learn that the Jewish leaders some of them were loyal to Tobiah of all things through marriage. And we'll read about that more a little bit when we get through get to chapter 13. Tobiah continued in verse 19, sending threatening letters to Nehemiah. And they attempted to recommend his friends inside of Jerusalem, that is, continued to recommend Tobiah and tell what all the good things that Tobiah had done, and they were acting as an intelligence system to report to Tobiah all the things that Nehemiah inside of Jerusalem was doing. So Nehemiah faced traitors among his own Jewish brethren, as if he didn't have enough trouble. I tell you what, it's 3 minutes till 8 o'clock. Let's stop right here and pick it up with chapter 7 next week. Any questions or comments?
Let's go back to Samaritans.
One of them, I think they were both Samaritans, but I think one of them was the governor of Samaria, the Samaritan province, yeah, of the Persian Empire. Let's dismiss with a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, tonight we thank you for courageous men like Nehemiah who stood for what was right, who stood to get the job done that you wanted done in spite of opposition from within and from without. And Father, help us to take Nehemiah's example and use it for us as we go throughout our Christian life, as we face the troubles that are bound to appear both from inside and outside. Lord, bless us as we continue to study your word. In Jesus' blessed name, amen.